He's considered to be the oldest human mummy found intact, and scientists believe he died more than 5,000 years ago. Because of new DNA technology, they're reimagining what he actually looked like. CNN's Michael Holmes.
From the Copper Age, a direct window into a life that ended long before written history began. The hikers who first stumbled upon him thought they had found a modern mountaineer, but the truth was far stranger. The man they found, later named Ötzi, wore goat-hide leggings, a grass-woven cloak, and shoes stuffed with grass for warmth. In his hand, he carried a copper axe, a rare and valuable tool in his time. His body, darkened but intact, looked less like a skeleton of the past and more like someone who had simply fallen asleep beneath the snow. Carbon dating revealed that Ötzi had lived around 3,300 BCE during the early days of metalworking in Europe. His preserved body offered more than just a glimpse of ancient clothing and tools. It preserved secrets about health, survival, and violence in a world both familiar and alien. Forensic analysis showed he had tattoos, 61 in total, not decorative but carefully placed across his body along joints and pressure points. These markings may have been a primitive form of medical therapy, perhaps to relieve the pain of arthritis. His final hours were equally telling. Wounds on his hand and ribs hinted at a violent struggle, and the arrowhead embedded in his shoulder, severing a major artery, left little doubt. Ötzi was killed. His belongings carried traces of blood from several other people, suggesting that he had not died in isolation but amidst conflict. Beyond the physical clues, scientists wanted to unlock the deeper mystery of who Ötzi really was. His stomach contained ibex meat, einkorn wheat, and fat, a hearty meal before a desperate mountain journey. His lungs bore traces of ash, proof that he had sat by a fire shortly before death. Yet the most transformative discoveries came not from what he ate or wore, but from the genetic code hidden within his bones. In 2012, researchers managed to sequence his genome, an achievement that electrified the field of ancient DNA. The findings suggested light skin, brown eyes, and, more startlingly, traces of steppe ancestry, a lineage associated with later Indo-European migrations. If true, this meant waves of people had entered Europe far earlier than previously believed, forcing historians to rethink the continent's past. The revelation turned Ötzi into a symbol of prehistoric migration, a supposed bridge between early farmers and the great population shifts that would shape Europe. Yet not all scientists were convinced. Ancient DNA studies were still in their infancy, and the risk of contamination was high. Modern human DNA, from researchers, handlers, or the environment, could easily infiltrate ancient samples and skew results. Despite these warnings, the idea of Ötzi as a genetic link endured, reshaping museum exhibits, documentaries, and even public imagination. But science is never static. By 2023, advances in genome sequencing allowed researchers to revisit Ötzi's DNA with unprecedented accuracy. This time, they worked from the dense bone of his hip, less likely to be tainted by outside DNA. Every step was done under strict conditions to eliminate contamination. When the results were unveiled, the shock was profound. The much-discussed steppe ancestry vanished. It had never been there at all. What had once been hailed as a revolutionary discovery turned out to be the product of contaminated data. The real Ötzi's genome told a different story. Over 92% of his ancestry traced back to Neolithic Anatolian farmers, the first agriculturalists who spread from modern-day Turkey into Europe 8 millennia ago. The rest came from older hunter-gatherer populations, but his lineage had remained unusually isolated, untouched by later waves of migration. The correction rewrote his place in history. Far from being a genetic bridge to modern Europeans, Ötzi represented a nearly vanished branch of humanity. His closest living relatives today are not in the Alps where he died, but on the island of Sardinia, where centuries of isolation preserved genetic traces long lost on the mainland. The discovery also overturned assumptions about his appearance. Instead of pale skin and thick hair, Ötzi had dark skin, brown eyes, and was balding, a living challenge to the neat, comfortable reconstructions that had filled museums for decades. Ötzi's story remains one of both revelation and humility. His frozen body is not just a relic of survival, but a reminder of how fragile our understanding of the past can be. Early excitement painted him as a genetic key to Europe's migrations, but later precision revealed a man whose ancestry told of isolation, resilience, and disappearance. His preserved form continues to force us to confront the truth that science does not protect our assumptions. It shatters them, again and again, to bring us closer to reality. The story of Ötzi, the Iceman, has undergone a remarkable transformation over the years, revealing just how fragile our assumptions about the past can be. Once thought to represent a bridge between distant populations of Europe, his genetic legacy is now understood in a very different light. The first genome sequencing of his remains was a groundbreaking feat for its time, yet early technology was vulnerable to contamination, and excitement often overshadowed caution. Recent studies, using far more advanced methods, have rewritten his history entirely. Instead of connecting far-flung groups, Ötzi has become a testament to how science evolves and how truth emerges only through patient, repeated study. His genetic story, once hailed as a tool for redrawing Europe's prehistoric map, now teaches us about the dangers of premature conclusions. But Ötzi's skin told another story that DNA alone could not capture. The strange dark lines covering his body, once dismissed as marks from freezing, were revealed under high-resolution microscopes to be tattoos, 61 in total, carefully placed in deliberate patterns. What shocked researchers was their uncanny alignment with acupuncture points still recognized in traditional Chinese medicine. Though Ötzi lived thousands of years before such practices were recorded, these markings may have been a form of pain relief, especially since many clustered around his joints and spine, where arthritis likely caused him chronic suffering. Even more intriguing, the pigments in his tattoos contained traces of medicinal herbs like artemisia and valeriana, plants known for their healing properties. Some of these herbs didn't even grow in the Alps, hinting at long journeys or trade networks that connected his people to distant tribes. Far from being a random wanderer, Ötzi may have sought out a healer whose knowledge of medicine was centuries ahead of its time, transforming his body into a living record of both pain and resilience. When scientists revisited his DNA in 2023, the discoveries were even more startling. For decades, he had been portrayed as fair-skinned, light-eyed, and thick-haired, an image displayed in museums and documentaries that felt familiar and reassuring. Yet the new sequencing shattered that illusion. Over 92% of his ancestry traced back to Neolithic Anatolian farmers who had migrated from modern-day Turkey 8,000 years ago, bringing agriculture, livestock, and new ways of life into Europe. The remaining fraction of his genome came from older hunter-gatherers, but unlike much of Europe, which saw waves of migration and mixing, Ötzi's community remained remarkably isolated. This meant he was not a direct ancestor of modern Europeans, but instead part of a nearly vanished branch of humanity whose closest genetic relatives today live not in the Alps, but on the island of Sardinia. Equally transformative was the revelation of his appearance. Far from the pale-skinned mountaineer long imagined, Ötzi had dark skin, brown eyes, and was already balding, not from 5,000 years in the ice, but due to genetic predisposition during his lifetime. This challenged long-held cultural expectations and underscored that Europe's past was far more diverse than earlier reconstructions had suggested. Science had not lied before. It had simply been incomplete, and in its incompleteness, it reflected the biases of those eager to see a version of the past that felt familiar. The new findings stripped away those illusions, forcing us to confront a more complex, unsettling, yet far richer truth. Ötzi's body also revealed the weight of his personal struggles. His DNA carried signs of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, arthritis, and lactose intolerance, conditions we often label as modern, but which clearly plague humans in the Copper Age. He was infected with Lyme disease, harbored parasites in his intestines, and suffered from gallstones and painful ulcers. His tattoos, aligned with acupuncture points, were not decorations but desperate attempts to manage his constant pain. Rather than the tireless hunter of myth, Ötzi was a man burdened by illness, pushing through a harsh existence with the tools his culture provided. Ultimately, his death was as dramatic as his life. In the final days, he traveled treacherous mountain paths, carrying weapons he had carefully repaired and eating large meals that hinted at urgency and preparation. But none of it saved him. An arrow struck him from behind, piercing his shoulder in a deliberate, fatal attack. The shaft was removed, but the arrowhead remained, sealing his fate. The snow quickly entombed his body, freezing not only his flesh, but also the story of a life lived on the edge of endurance, only to be rediscovered 5 millennia later. Today, Ötzi stands as more than a frozen relic. He is a reminder of our shared fragility, of lineages that thrived and vanished, of traditions and remedies carried through generations, and of how science continually reshapes the past we think we know. His dark skin, his illnesses, his isolation, and his violent death remind us that human history is not a simple march of progress, but a story of resilience,